"This is my dad," Michael said with a smirk, clapping me on the back as if I were some harmless pet. "Don't mind him. He's basically retired from life." Laughter erupted around the polished oak table, a chorus of polished suits and practiced smiles. His friends, all slick-haired and expensively dressed, raised their glasses as if his words were witty instead of cruel. I stood there, gripping the stem of my untouched wine glass, the chandelier light catching the silver in my hair. My throat burned, not from alcohol, but from the sting of his words. Michael's laughter rang out again, louder this time, as though humiliating me in front of his colleagues was part of the entertainment. My son, the same boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose college tuition I had worked double shifts to pay, was now looking at me as though I were a relic, a punchline. What none of them saw was how my hand trembled slightly against the glass. Not from weakness, but from fury. I kept it buried deep under a steady smile. The restaurant buzzed with soft piano music and the low hum of conversation. White linen tablecloths, crystal glasses, perfectly arranged centerpieces. Everything screamed of prestige. Yet in that gilded atmosphere, I had never felt smaller. My son had invited me here under the pretense of meeting his friends. Instead, he had dragged me into a theater where I was the performance, the spectacle for them to mock. I caught my reflection in the glossy mirror across the room. A man weathered by time. Yes, wrinkles carved by years of sacrifice. Shoulders sloped from decades of carrying the weight of family responsibility. But behind my tired eyes there was something Michael had forgotten. Fire. He kept talking, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Dad doesn't really get modern life. He still thinks streaming is what happens when the roof leaks," he joked, and another round of laughter followed. Even the waiter smirked as he set down another bottle of wine. That was when I decided. Tonight would not end the way my son expected. He wanted to present me as a fool. He was about to learn how dangerous it is to underestimate the man who raised him. I leaned forward, my voice calm, almost too calm, my words sliced through the laughter like glass shattering on marble. "Michael," I said evenly, my eyes locking on his, "you should be very careful with the hand that built the floor you're standing on, because it can take it away in a single motion." The laughter died instantly. Forks froze midair. His friends exchanged uneasy glances, and for the first time that night, my son's confident grin faltered. The silence that followed my words clung to the table like thick smoke. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, forcing a laugh that never quite made it past his throat. His friends looked away, suddenly fascinated by their glasses, their phones, anything but the tension radiating between father and son. I didn't push further. Not yet. I let the weight of my words linger, like the echo of a slammed door. Because the truth was, my son had no idea who I really was. Not anymore. As I sat there, I thought of the boy he used to be. The boy who would climb onto my shoulders to watch fireworks on the 4th of July. The boy who clung to my hand when we crossed busy streets. The boy who once told me, with the innocence only a child can have, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." That boy was gone. Somewhere along the way, ambition had stolen him. Or maybe it was arrogance, fed by the very foundation I had laid for him. I had worked my hands raw so he could stand taller. I had stayed up nights with aching joints, calculating how to stretch every dollar, so he would never feel the hunger or fear I had felt as a child. The memories rushed back, sharp and unrelenting. I remembered the winter of 1999, when the pipes burst in our old house. The cold was so bitter that ice formed inside the windows, and Michael had been only 8 years old, shivering under 3 blankets. I had spent the night in the basement, waist deep in freezing water, patching pipes with numb fingers just so he could wake up to warmth. I remembered the summer he turned 16, when I traded in my own truck, the only vehicle I had ever truly loved, so he could have a reliable car for school and his part-time job. I had walked to work for nearly a year, through rain and blistering sun, and told him the truck had been a good deal just to keep his pride intact. And I remembered his first year of college. Tuition was a mountain I had no business climbing, but I climbed anyway. Overtime shifts, side jobs, weekends lost to exhaustion. I carried that burden so he could walk across a stage one day and shake a dean's hand. Every sacrifice had been a brick in the castle he now lived in. And tonight, inside this elegant restaurant, I realized those bricks had turned into walls that separated us. The air smelled of roasted duck and aged wine, but all I tasted was bitterness. I glanced at Michael again. He was leaning back now, trying to recover his composure, his friends whispering nervously among themselves. He wanted to move past my remark, to pretend the moment hadn't cracked the image he had crafted of himself, the polished, successful man with the perfect life. But I knew the truth, and deep down, so did he. Because beneath his expensive suit and confident swagger, Michael still carried the foundation I had given him. My labor, my sacrifices, my unwavering support, and he had chosen to bury me under it. The chandelier above us cast a golden glow over the table, but it felt harsh, exposing. It reminded me of hospital lights, cold, merciless, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel it fully. The disappointment, the betrayal, the grief of losing a son not to death but to pride. I clenched my hands under the table, my fingers brushing against the rough calluses that never seemed to fade. They were reminders of who I was, of what I had endured to build a life for him. My son looked at those hands now as if they meant nothing. The injustice wasn't just tonight's humiliation, it was years of being quietly erased, years of being tolerated rather than cherished. It was watching the boy I raised become a man who introduced me as a burden. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. I would not stay silent anymore. Michael tried to smooth it over, flashing that charming smile he'd perfected in boardrooms and cocktail parties. "Don't mind my dad. He's old-fashioned," he said with a forced chuckle. "He means well, but he's stuck in the past." The words hit harder than the earlier joke. Old-fashioned. Stuck in the past. As though my life's work, the decades I had clawed through to provide for him, could be reduced to a quaint relic, something to smile at politely, then discard. His friends nodded, relieved by the attempt at humor, eager to escape the tension. One of them, a young man in a navy suit, added with a smirk, "At least he showed up dressed decently. My old man looks like a farmer half the time." Laughter broke out again. Michael laughed too, and that was the exact moment something inside me snapped. Because I wasn't just being mocked as a father, I was being erased as a man. I sat very still, but inside I was a storm. My chest felt tight, not with fear, but with a simmering fury that had been building for years through every unreturned call, every holiday too busy to visit, every time he asked for money with a smile, but never once said thank you. Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice, but making sure everyone could hear. "He doesn't understand how the real world works. I mean, the guy still carries cash." The table erupted again, the clink of glasses and bursts of laughter bouncing against the crystal and polished wood. But this time, I didn't just hear it. I saw it. Saw how Michael needed their approval, how he used me as a stepping stone to climb higher in their eyes. The breaking point wasn't just the insult. It was the realization that my son, the boy I once held against my chest on sleepless nights, saw me not as a father, but as currency, a token to spend for a cheap laugh. I placed my glass down carefully. The stem tapped against the tablecloth, soft but final, like the sound of a gavel. My heartbeat slowed, steady, measured. I had spent a lifetime building control, and tonight I would use it. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence return. My son noticed it first, the way the air shifted around me. His smile faltered just slightly, and I caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. For years I had swallowed the bitterness, told myself he would grow out of it, that arrogance was just a phase. But phases end. This was not a phase. This was who he had become. And I decided in that precise moment that I would not let him continue walking over me. Not in public, not in private, not ever again. The breaking point was not rage, it was clarity. I was done being his shadow. I was done being his punchline. And soon Michael would understand exactly what it meant to laugh at the man who had given him everything. The ride home was quiet, but my mind was deafening. The city lights blurred past the car window, each neon glow flickering like fragments of memory. Birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings. Moments when Michael had clung to me with pure trust, when he still looked at me as though I hung the moon. And now he looked at me like an accessory he had outgrown. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My hands ached, those same hands that had once held his bicycle steady as he wobbled down the driveway shouting, "Don't let go, Dad." He never knew that I had kept running beside him, even after he found his balance, just to make sure he wouldn't fall. That was who I had been, the safety net, the steady rock, the father who never let go. But tonight, as his laughter echoed in my memory, I wondered if maybe I had held on too long. The doubt crept in, insidious. What if I'm being too harsh? He's still my son. Maybe this was just foolish pride, the kind that makes young men act bigger than they are. Maybe the right thing to do was to swallow it, let him have his success, and fade quietly into the background. Wasn't that what good fathers did? Sacrifice even their dignity for their children. But another voice, colder, sharper, cut through the haze. And what about you? Haven't you sacrificed enough? How many more times must you be humiliated before you realize this is not love, not respect? Only exploitation? The traffic light ahead turned red, washing the car interior in a harsh crimson glow. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger. Eyes tired, jaw tight, the face of a man who had given everything and been repaid with mockery. I exhaled slowly, the doubt weighing heavy. For decades I had defined myself by being Michael's father. His victories were my victories, his happiness my purpose. If I took that away, if I stepped out of that role, what would remain of me? The light turned green, but I didn't move. Cars honked behind me, horns blaring in impatience, but I sat still, staring at the empty road ahead. Because the truth was terrifying. If I continued to allow this, if I continued to excuse his arrogance, I would lose the last fragments of myself. And maybe, just maybe, the only way to save what remained of me was to show him clearly, unmistakably, that I was not disposable. The doubt didn't vanish, but it hardened into something else. Resolve. I pressed the accelerator. The road stretched forward, endless and dark, and for the first time in years I felt I was driving toward something, not away. Maybe you've been there too, sitting in silence while someone you love cuts you down with a smile, pretending it's just a joke. Maybe you've swallowed the humiliation because you told yourself it's family. I can't fight back. But tell me, how many times can you stay quiet before silence becomes surrender? That night, as I drove home, I realized I had been surrendering for years. Every sacrifice, every dollar, every sleepless night, all of it had turned me into a man my own son thought he could mock without consequence. What would you have done in my place? Would you have smiled and let it pass? Or would you have drawn a line? Because I decided the line had already been crossed, and from that moment on, everything changed. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazy circles above me, the shadows cutting across the room like blades. Michael's laughter echoed in my skull, sharper with each replay, until it wasn't just a memory, it was a wound. Beside me on the nightstand sat an old photo, one I hadn't looked at in years. Michael, no older than 10, grinning with 2 front teeth missing, holding a baseball glove nearly bigger than his chest. His mother had taken the picture at the park, her laughter caught in the frame as clearly as his smile. I used to keep that photo as a reminder of why I worked so hard. Tonight it burned holes through me, a reminder of how far we'd fallen. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and reached for the box under my dresser. Inside were folders, receipts, account statements, 20 years of meticulous records. I had kept everything, not out of paranoia, but out of habit. My late wife used to say, "One day you'll be glad you saved it all." That day had arrived. I spread the papers across the kitchen table like puzzle pieces. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, the silence broken only by the steady tick of the wall clock. Line by line, dollar by dollar, my life story unfolded on the paper. Mortgage payments, tuition bills, car loans, business startup costs. All of it written in black and white, undeniable. Every major step in Michael's life had been financed by my sacrifice. His friends thought he was self-made, a success story polished for social gatherings. They didn't know his empire had been built on my back. My chest tightened, but not from sorrow anymore. It was something sharper, cleaner, a blade of focus. I picked up one bank statement, the numbers glaring like accusations, the tuition payment that had nearly emptied my savings account. I remembered the night I mailed that check, hands trembling, whispering to myself that it would all be worth it when he walked across that stage in cap and gown. I turned to another document, the deed to the first condo he ever owned. My name was right there, the cosigner. Without me, that condo would have been a dream. Without that condo, he never would have had the credibility to impress the investors who later funded his business. It was all there, proof, evidence of a truth Michael could not laugh away. The old voice of doubt whispered again, "He's your son. You'll regret this if you go too far." But I silenced it with another memory, the sound of his friends laughing while he used me as the evening's entertainment. No, enough was enough. I closed the folder and set it aside. My plan didn't need to be loud or violent. It only needed to be precise. Michael had taken pride in erasing me in front of others. My revenge would be to remind him publicly, undeniably, that I was the foundation of everything he stood on. I didn't know exactly how yet, but the pieces were already shifting in my mind. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitter scent filling the kitchen. Outside, dawn was beginning to lighten the horizon. For the first time in years, I felt awake, truly awake. As the first rays of sun cut through the blinds, I looked at that photo of 10-year-old Michael again. For a brief moment, I almost softened, but then I heard his adult voice, mocking, dismissive, using me as a punchline. And I knew, the boy in the photo was gone. The man he had become was about to learn that every joke has a cost. By the next evening, the plan had begun to take shape. I drove to the storage unit I hadn't opened in years. The air inside smelled of dust and forgotten time, the kind of stillness that holds memories captive. Against the far wall sat the wooden chest I had built with my own hands, a chest Michael once used to climb on when he was a child, pretending it was a pirate's treasure box. Inside lay more than just keepsakes. I lifted out the leather-bound ledger I had kept through the years, not just numbers but stories. Every entry held a note, a reason, a sacrifice. March 2004, extra shift at the mill, money used for Michael's braces. September 2007, sold the Chevy to cover tuition installment. April 2012, personal loan approved, co-signed for Michael's business startup. It wasn't just a ledger, it was the map of his entire life, paid for in full by me. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, I imagined the look on his face when he realized every success he flaunted had roots in my sweat. That ledger wasn't just proof, it was a weapon. I tucked it under my arm and returned home. That night, I polished the wooden dining table until it gleamed, laid out the ledger, the deed copies, the bank records, everything. Under the lamplight, the papers looked almost ceremonial, like exhibits in a trial. I didn't need a courtroom, I only needed an audience, the right one. Michael had humiliated me publicly. It was only fitting that his lesson would be learned in the same arena. But before striking, I needed to test my resolve. I called my sister, someone who had always seen through my silences. "You sound different," she said immediately. "What's going on?" I hesitated. "Do you think a father ever has the right to remind his son of everything he's forgotten?" Her voice softened. "If the son has turned his back, maybe reminding him isn't cruelty. Maybe it's mercy." Her words settled over me like a final blessing. The next weekend, Michael invited me to another dinner. Not with friends this time, with partners. Important people. Investors. I could almost hear the condescension in his tone when he said, "It'll be good for you to meet real professionals, Dad." Perfect. I arrived in my best suit, the one my late wife had bought me for our 25th anniversary. The restaurant buzzed with soft jazz and the scent of seared steak. Michael was already there, laughing too loudly, performing again. "Gentlemen," he announced as I approached, "this is my father. Don't be fooled by appearances. He still thinks TikTok is a clock you hang on the wall." The table laughed. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled, calm and measured. Because this time, I wasn't empty-handed. I set the leather ledger on the table with a soft thud. The sound silenced the room more effectively than any raised voice could have. Michael blinked, his smile faltering. "What's that?" he asked, his tone forced casual. "The truth," I said simply. I opened it to the first page, the ink faded but legible, and slid it toward the nearest investor. Their curiosity hooked them before Michael could intervene. Eyes scanned the neat handwriting, the records of sacrifices no business plan could replicate. Michael's laughter dried in his throat. "Dad, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I cut in, my voice steady. "Every number in that book is a piece of my life. Every dollar I earned, every sacrifice I made. It built what you sit on today. Your partners should know the foundation of the empire you claim is yours." The investors exchanged glances, whispers rippling down the table. The silence pressed heavy, suffocating Michael's performance. For the first time, the stage was mine. And I wasn't finished. Michael's face drained of color as the ledger made its slow journey around the table. His friends had laughed easily, but his partners, these men and women who had invested real money, did not laugh so easily. They leaned closer, brows furrowed, tracing each entry like jurors examining evidence. One of them looked up at Michael. "Your father co-signed your first property loan?" The question cut through the quiet like a blade. Michael cleared his throat, fumbling. "Well, yes, but that was years ago. Irrelevant now." Another investor shook his head slowly. "Irrelevant? Without that co-signature, you wouldn't have had collateral." "That's not irrelevant. That's the root." The air thickened. I could see Michael's jaw tighten, the mask of confidence slipping inch by inch. He reached across the table, trying to snatch the ledger, but I placed my hand firmly on it, my calloused hand against his manicured one, a reminder of where the real work had been done. "Careful, son," I said softly, but everyone heard it. "You might erase the evidence, but you can't erase the truth." The silence that followed was electric. That was the moment. The moment I knew there was no going back. I had revealed the foundation beneath his empire, torn the curtain away from his carefully staged performance. Michael's eyes locked on mine, a silent plea mixed with fury. "Dad, stop this," he whispered through clenched teeth. "You'll ruin everything." I leaned closer, my voice low but sharp enough to cut. "No, Michael. You ruined it when you forgot where you came from." He pushed his chair back abruptly, the scrape against the marble floor echoing like a gunshot. His partners exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. I could see the calculations forming in their eyes. Doubt, suspicion, reconsideration, the kind of cracks that can collapse a business. And in that instant, I realized the truth. My son wasn't untouchable. He wasn't invincible. He was fragile, built on a story that had never truly been his. I stood slowly, gathering the ledger, and tucking it under my arm. The papers inside whispered as they shifted my proof, my weapon, my line in the sand. "This meeting is over," I said calmly, turning to leave. "When you're ready to acknowledge the man who carried you here, you know where to find me." I walked out of that restaurant without looking back, the murmur of voices rising behind me, Michael scrambling to contain the fallout. But I didn't need to see his panic to know it was there. I could feel it. The point of no return wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, it was steady, and it was absolute. Because from that night on, Michael would never again see me as a prop for his stories. He would see me for what I truly was, the architect of his life, and the man who could dismantle it piece by piece. 3 days passed before Michael called. His number flashed on my phone late in the evening, the silence of my house broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad," he began, his voice softer than usual, almost careful. "Can we talk?" I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting to the ledger still resting on the table. "We've already talked, Michael. The problem is, you never listened." He exhaled, a forced sigh that sounded rehearsed. "I know I've been rough. I've said things I shouldn't have. But the other night, what you did, it caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting it. I guess I just didn't realize how much you've done for me." It was the closest thing to an apology I had heard from him in years. But I knew my son. I knew when he was telling the truth, and when he was telling me what he thought I wanted to hear. "You realize, Michael," I said quietly, "you just chose to forget." There was silence on the line, and then his voice returned, smoother this time, more controlled. "Look, Dad, the investors are still a little shaken, but if we show them that we're united, if we present a strong family image, things will settle down. They need to see that we're solid." There it was, the real reason. Not remorse, not love, damage control. "So you don't want a father," I said. "You want a prop." "No, it's not like that," he insisted, words tumbling quickly now. "It's just people are watching. They need to see that I didn't build this alone, that I had support. It makes the story stronger. We can spin it, Dad. Use it. Use it. Use me." The same pattern, dressed up in softer words. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill it. He scrambled, voice edging toward desperation. "Please, Dad, come to dinner tomorrow. Just the family. No partners, no investors. Just us. We can talk it through." For a moment the image flashed in my mind. The boy he once was, tugging at my sleeve, begging me not to let go of the bike. Not yet. That boy's voice was buried somewhere inside the man speaking now, but it was faint, almost drowned out by ambition. "Still," I said, "all right, dinner." His relief was immediate, audible. "Thank you, Dad, you won't regret this." But as I set the phone down, my chest tightened. Not with hope, but with certainty. Because I knew the truth. Michael wasn't inviting me to dinner to heal the wound. He was inviting me to bury it, to plaster over the cracks, not repair the foundation. And if he thought I would let him use me one more time, he was about to discover just how wrong he was. False hope is a dangerous thing. It can make a man believe forgiveness is easy, when in reality it's just the calm before the storm. Dinner at Michael's house smelled of roasted lamb and expensive wine, the kind of meal meant to impress, not to comfort. His wife greeted me with a strained smile, her eyes flicking nervously toward Michael, as if rehearsed lines were about to be spoken. The table was set perfectly, silverware aligned like soldiers. Michael poured me a glass of wine himself, his charm turned up to its highest setting. "To family," he he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his, though I didn't drink. Conversation started light. Work, the weather, little anecdotes rehearsed for warmth. But beneath it all, I felt the tension like music played half a step out of tune. When Michael excused himself to take a call, I wandered into the living room. Old habit, perhaps, or maybe instinct. On the mantel sat framed photos, vacations, business events, their picture-perfect life. But tucked behind one frame was something that caught my eye, a folded document. Curiosity prickled, and before I could stop myself, I slid it free. It was a property agreement. My name was there, bold at the bottom, except I had never signed it. My chest tightened as I scanned the words. Michael had listed me as a guarantor for another loan, a massive one, tens of thousands, maybe more, and the signature, a forgery. My name copied in his careless hand. The edges of the paper trembled in my grasp. He hadn't just mocked me. He hadn't just erased me. He had stolen from me, used my very identity as a stepping stone. I slipped the document back before he returned, though the taste of bile lingered in my mouth. He sat down, smiling broadly, as though the world hadn't just shifted. "Dad," he said warmly, "I think this is the start of something new for us." I forced a smile, nodding, my hands steady even as my pulse roared in my ears. Because now I knew this wasn't just arrogance. This wasn't just disrespect. This was fraud, betrayal in ink. The meal carried on. Laughter sprinkled like artificial sugar. Michael leaned into every gesture, every phrase, trying to rebuild the image I had shattered. He thought dinner would reset the balance, that I would walk away convinced of his sincerity. But I wasn't the same man anymore. Because hidden behind that photo frame, I had found the truth. And with it, the final piece of my plan fell into place. When I left that night, Michael hugged me at the door. "We'll be fine, Dad. You'll see." I patted his back, steady as stone. "Oh, Michael," I whispered, "you'll see too." The unexpected twist wasn't his charm, his false remorse, or his carefully staged dinner. It was the discovery that he had already crossed a line he couldn't uncross. And if he thought I had embarrassed him before, he hadn't seen anything yet. Have you ever discovered something about someone you love that made your blood run cold? Something so shocking that for a moment you didn't recognize the person standing in front of you? That's what happened to me that night. I had walked into Michael's house hoping, maybe foolishly, that we could rebuild what we had lost. Instead, I found a forged signature, my name, my trust, my identity used like a pawn in his game. So let me ask you, if your own child stole from you, lied to you, and then smiled at you across the dinner table as if nothing had happened, what would you do? Would you stay silent to protect the bond of blood, or would you finally strike back? Because I knew then the strike was coming. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later. Michael wanted me at a corporate gala, his company's annual celebration, attended by investors, partners, and half the city's so-called elite. I almost laughed when I read the message. After everything, after the forged signature burning a hole in my mind, he still wanted me there. He wasn't inviting me as a father. He was summoning me as a prop again, hoping my presence could soften the doubts lingering around him since the dinner. This time, I went willingly, but not as his decoration. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, the air perfumed with champagne and expensive cologne. A string quartet played softly, while waiters in crisp uniforms floated through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres. It was Michael's perfect stage, and he stood at the center, shaking hands and flashing his politician smile. When he spotted me, his relief was almost visible. He hurried over, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Dad, thank you for coming. This means everything. Tonight has to go perfectly." I smiled faintly. "Oh, don't worry, Michael. Tonight will be unforgettable." He didn't catch the edge in my tone. The evening unfolded in scripted elegance. Speeches, applause, polite laughter. Michael's company was thriving, at least on the surface. But I knew what lay beneath. I had the forged document safely tucked into my briefcase, along with copies of the ledger pages. My weapons were not fists or threats. They were truth, sharpened to a blade. Halfway through dinner, the master of ceremonies announced Michael's keynote. He rose, confident, the golden sun in a tailored suit, basking in the spotlight. His voice carried through the hall as he spoke of growth, legacy, and vision. "And none of this would have been possible without the support of family," he declared, gesturing toward me at the head table. "My father David is here tonight. He taught me the value of hard work and sacrifice." Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. He was using me again, this time not as a joke, but as a prop in his mythology. I stood slowly, acknowledging the applause with a polite nod. But instead of sitting, I walked toward the stage. Michael's smile froze, confusion flickering in his eyes. I took the microphone from the podium with calm authority. The room hushed. "It's true," I began, my voice steady. "I taught my son about sacrifice. But perhaps it's time you all know just how much that sacrifice cost, and how it has been repaid." Gasps rippled through the audience. Michael stepped forward, whispering urgently, "Dad, sit down." But I didn't. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the document, holding it up so the light caught the bold letters of my name, forged and false. "This," I said clearly, "is my signature, or rather his version of it. My son used my name without my knowledge to secure a loan for his company, a company many of you have invested in." The room erupted in murmurs, the quartet's music halting mid-note. Investors leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Michael's face had gone pale, sweat shining at his temples. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "That's not, Dad, this isn't the place." "No, Michael," I cut in, my voice rising with years of buried strength. "This is exactly the place." And for the first time in his life, my son realized the stage no longer belonged to him. The ballroom fell into stunned silence, broken only by the nervous clinking of a glass somewhere in the back. All eyes were on me, the father Michael had paraded as a symbol of sacrifice now turning into his accuser. Michael lunged for the microphone, his voice shaky but loud. "This is a mistake. My father's confused. He doesn't know what he's talking about." I stepped aside, holding up the forged document like a shield. "Confused?" My voice echoed across the hall. "Confusion doesn't explain a forged signature. Confusion doesn't explain a son stealing his father's name to secure money he could never have earned honestly. This isn't confusion, Michael. This is betrayal." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The investors at the front table exchanged sharp whispers. One of them, the same man who had questioned Michael at the last dinner, stood abruptly. "Is this true?" he demanded. Michael's lips moved, but no sound came. His carefully built confidence had collapsed into stammering silence. I opened the ledger and laid it on the podium, flipping to the pages that told our story in ink and numbers. For years I carried him. Every loan, every tuition bill, every opportunity he claims to have created for himself. It came from here, from me. And this is how he repays it, by turning me into a joke in front of his friends, then into a forged signature on his contracts. The room buzzed with outrage. Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing Michael's face as it crumbled under the weight of truth. "You taught me to fight for respect, Michael," I continued, my eyes never leaving his. "But somewhere along the way, you decided respect was something you could steal instead of earn. Tonight, that ends." A woman in the audience, an investor I recognized from business articles, rose to her feet. "If this is true, then your credibility is gone, Michael. You've lied to us, and you've lied to him." Her words were the crack that split the dam. Voices rose all around, questions, accusations, demands. Michael tried to speak, but every sound drowned beneath the tide of disbelief and anger. I closed the ledger with a soft, deliberate snap. "I built the floor you stand on, son, and tonight I've taken it back." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. Michael stood frozen, a man stripped bare in the one arena he thought he owned. His smile was gone, his words useless. For the first time, the room wasn't his. It was mine. I left the podium and walked calmly through the crowd. Heads turned as I passed, whispers trailing in my wake. Some clapped me on the shoulder, others simply stared. But I didn't need their approval. The only thing that mattered was the look on Michael's face, the realization that he had underestimated me, and that the man he thought was powerless had just ended his illusion of control. In the days that followed the gala, the fallout spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story within 24 hours. "Promising young executive exposed by father for forgery." The headlines read. Michael's photo was plastered on every business page, his polished smile now paired with words like fraud and betrayal. Investors pulled out almost immediately. One by one, contracts dissolved, partnerships evaporated, and the empire Michael had flaunted crumbled beneath him. I didn't need to lift another finger. The truth I had set free did the work for me. At home, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee as the morning light poured through the blinds. The same ledger that had once felt like a burden now lay closed in front of me, no longer a weight, but a reminder of strength. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. Michael tried to call me, twice. Then again, I let the phone buzz against the table until it went silent. His voice messages came filled with panic first, then anger, and finally desperation. "Dad, we can fix this. Please, just talk to me. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Then later, "You don't understand. You've ruined everything." And finally, "I need you. I can't do this without you." Each message was a stage of collapse, the voice of a man stripped of the arrogance he once wielded like armor. But I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I walked through my house, pausing at the photos that lined the shelves. Memories stared back at me, the boy on my shoulders, the teenager in his cap and gown, the young man holding keys to his first car. For so long, I had looked at those images with pain, wondering if I had given too much. Now, I saw them differently. I saw proof that I had done my part as a father. I had built, sacrificed, and given him every tool. What he had done with them was his choice, and his choice alone. By the end of the week, Michael's company was in free fall. Rumors of lawsuits spread. Former allies distanced themselves, claiming ignorance. His friends, the same ones who had laughed at his jokes, stopped answering his calls. The laughter that had once echoed so easily was gone. And me? I felt lighter, not because I had destroyed him, but because I had reclaimed myself. I knew he would come to me eventually, not as the confident man in the tailored suit, but as the son who finally realized the truth of what respect costs. Until then, I sat in the quiet of my home, the clock ticking softly, the air filled with the scent of coffee and wood polish. The ledger stayed on the table, not as evidence anymore, but as a symbol, not of sacrifice lost, but of strength remembered. Michael had thought he could erase me. Instead, he had carved me deeper into the story of his life than he ever intended. The resolution wasn't revenge alone. It was justice, and justice, I realized, has a weight far heavier and far more satisfying than vengeance ever could. Weeks passed, and the storm around Michael only grew darker. Lawsuits were filed, the forged loan unraveled in court, and his carefully curated image shattered under the weight of truth. Meanwhile, my life, David's life, took a different turn. For the first time in years, I felt no weight pressing on my chest when I woke up. The mornings were quieter, calmer, filled with small rituals I had long neglected. I brewed coffee slowly, savoring the smell as it filled the kitchen. I took long walks through the neighborhood, listening to the crunch of gravel under my shoes, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was as though I was rediscovering myself, not the father defined by sacrifice, but the man who had been buried beneath it. One afternoon, I opened the garage and found the old workbench where I had once built toys for Michael. The wood was scarred, tools scattered, dust coating everything. For years I had avoided it, too pained by the memories of a boy who used to sit beside me, hammering nails into scraps of wood, grinning at the thought of building something with his own hands. Now I cleaned the bench, oiled the tools, and began again. Not for Michael, for me. The first thing I made was a small wooden box. Simple, sturdy, with dovetail joints carved carefully by hand. On the lid, I engraved a single word with my old soldering iron, freedom. Every time I looked at it, I felt the truth settle deeper. I was free not from being a father, but from being a shadow. Free from carrying a man who no longer respected the weight I bore for him. Michael tried to reach me again. This time, he came to my house, standing on the porch with a face I barely recognized. The arrogance was gone, replaced by exhaustion and something that looked almost like regret. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking, I need help." For a moment I saw the boy he once was, the boy who once believed in me, and though a part of me ached, another part knew the truth. Sometimes the only way to teach a man the value of respect is to let him learn the cost of losing it. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I simply said, "Michael, I gave you everything once. Until you learn to respect it, I have nothing left to give." His shoulders sagged, his eyes wet. He whispered something, maybe an apology, maybe just desperation, before turning away. I watched him walk down the driveway, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel powerless. I felt whole. Because transformation isn't about changing who you are. It's about reclaiming who you've always been. I wasn't just David, the father who sacrificed. I was David, the man who built, who endured, who still had fire in his chest and calluses on his hands to prove it. Life moved forward. I volunteered at the community workshop, teaching young people how to use tools, how to craft something with their own hands. Some of them didn't have fathers. Others did, but they came for guidance all the same. And in their eyes I found something Michael had long lost, respect freely given. At night, I sat at my dining table, the ledger still resting nearby. I didn't need to open it anymore. Its story was already written, etched not just in ink but in me. My son had tried to erase me. Instead, he had given me back to myself. And that was the greatest transformation of all. In the end, revenge wasn't about destroying my son. It was about reclaiming myself. Michael thought he could define me with jokes, erase me with arrogance, and even steal my very name with ink on a page. But the truth is stronger than lies, and respect cannot be forged. I am David. I am the man who built, who sacrificed, and who finally remembered that silence is not love, it is surrender, and I will never surrender again. So I ask you, if someone you loved mocked your sacrifices, erased your worth, and tried to use you as a stepping stone, what would you do? Would you let them keep walking? Or would you remind them, as I did, that every empire has a foundation, and the foundation always decides how long it stands?